when everything was chaotic around me is when my nervous system was calm and I felt safe, even knowing the whole, my whole life is going to shit.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining me. My name is Reesa and I'm your host. We are talking to real families about real stories here on The Real Family Eats, where we've got food for thought and thoughtful food. So let's eat. Welcome back, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm excited for today's episode. We have JP joining us. Hi, JP. Thank you so much for being a guest on The Real Family Eats.
Hi, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes. So I'm so excited to hear a little bit about your story and your recipe, of course. But before we get started, for anybody who doesn't know you, can you introduce yourself for us?
Yeah, I am a 42-year-old single father to a 10-year-old girl, and I've been doing the co-parenting thing for about 8 years. 8 years and a little bit of change. We had split up right after she turned two. And then, we had the normal fighting, conflict,
Mm,
hurt feelings, all of that stuff for a good year and a half, probably, close to 2 years before it started changing or, finished changing.
mhm.
Most of it was me working on myself and going through my childhood baggage and traumas and this and that and learning how to communicate better and get out of my own way and, sort of process all the grief that I was kind of dealing with at the same time. And
Okay.
so then the better I got at all these things, then the easier it got. But obviously it still takes time because she'd heard me say that I'm different, I've changed and all these different things for different parts of our relationship and all these, so it takes a while for it to sink in. And then growing up in and around the AA system from childhood, my dad had quit drinking when I was young. There were sponsors. And so
Okay.
the community and having somebody that's a little farther ahead of you on the journey of no matter what it is, whether it's business coach, you know, nutrition coach, personal finance, personal fitness, any of these different things.
Hmm.
If you want to collapse time, avoid booby traps, change your mindset, change your reality, and all these different things, and be held accountable, especially. I worked with people, found communities, coaches, and this stuff when I was dealing with the high conflict and everything. And then it kind of evolved into me doing the same thing for other people, especially dads, because we're taught not to ask for help and not to have any problems and, suck it up and deal with it, all that kind of stuff. And it's starting to change, but it's a passion subject for me and it's a passion kind of deal for me. And it's one of those deals where, seeing the dad side, hearing the dad side, getting some empathy for the fathers who are not able to, you know, it's a big shockwave for the dads because typically the dads move out and they lose the kids. And so you go
Mm.
from having every night with your kids to 6, 8 days a month.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's a sure everybody else deals with you having to leave the house and the breakup and all that stuff, but you lost your home, you lost your wife, you lost your kids, you lost everything. And there's not a lot of empathy or, care for the guys, it seems.
Yeah. And that I honestly, I've got to be honest with you. I'm so thankful for you being willing to even come and talk about some of the dad side of things because I absolutely agree with you and I'm so on board with that passion as far as just really creating a space of change when it comes to men and emotions and you know biasly I have two sons of my own, so if anything it's for
Right.
hopefully for their future too. And so I'm so excited to kind of talk a little bit more about that with you. Before we kind of jump all the way in, tell us, what recipe are you sharing with our audience today, and why did you choose this one?
Well, I mean, it's I grew up in a restaurant. My parents owned a small restaurant. Dad was the cook, mom was the waitress. And this was my birthday cake. This was the deal Dad made for, certain people for their birthdays and fundraisers and these things and those things. And it's easy, but it's different. You know what I mean? It's not a pie or it's not a cream pie that you're having to try to do, or a pumpkin pie or a apple pie kind of deal where the crust is finicky, or you might be able to, some of these things that kind of fall apart if you don't know how to bake really well. And you can make it as elaborate as you want or as simple as you want, and it's kind of you can play with it. I mean, this one is the one that you're making is a little bit different than the one my dad made because he used, if you get double stuffed Oreos,
Okay.
crumbs, and then
Yeah.
add the butter to that, and then to make that your crust is how he used to do
Ooh.
it. But you
Okay.
can also get the pre-made, pie crusts
Hmm.
and make the same dessert in that and not have to worry about the crust at all and put it on the Oreo one or put it on the graham cracker one and it'd be the same. It tastes just as good. So you can make it a pie, you can make it a big pan dish. I mean, put some chocolate shavings on top after you're all done if you want to make it look fancy for Thanksgiving or Christmas, stuff like that.
Yeah. I love it. And I love that it sounds like it has such a special place in your family's life. And so I appreciate you being willing to share that and let us into that world. So tell me, give me the overview of the ingredients, the steps I'll get assembling and mixing while we chat.
Not a lot of ingredients. I mean, you just kind of whatever bottom you want to be able to make it into squares. You use a
Okay.
brownie pan or a cake pan or anything like that. You can use Oreos. The recipe that I'd sent you had like a pecan crumb one, or
Hmm.
you can use graham cracker, any kind of, you can go as chocolate or as healthy as you want with the crust. And then it's a cream cheese, layer, chocolate
Hmm.
pudding layer, whipped cream layer, and that's pretty much it. I mean, but you can use, it's versatile and I like it because you can use it and change it and mix it for whatever you like because you can swap out the chocolate pudding for strawberry or lime or whatever flavors that you want.
Yeah.
As long as you match the bottom, it's pretty universal to whatever fits for you to make it at any given time because it's
Yeah.
mostly just pudding.
Well, we like pudding in our house, so I'm excited. I've never tried this particular kind of recipe, so I'm excited to jump in. For anybody who is watching and you're looking at my dish, so I've already done my crust layer and I've put my cream cheese in and let that kind of set a little bit. So this is nice and chilled. So just so you're aware of kind of where I'm jumping in as far as when I'm making it today. So while I do this, JP, I'd love to talk a little bit more, really starting because I heard you mention in there that there's a different side of when you're going through divorce and you're separating homes, and just that beginning part of dads commonly being the ones that are moving out and that are maybe on the limited schedule of seeing your children, and what that's like as a father to kind of go through that, and what's going on for you in that moment. And I heard you mention kind of grief in there. Can you talk and start us there?
Yeah, I mean I got in my particular situation, I got extremely lucky because we were unmarried. So we're not wrapped into the system. We never got thrown into the money-making court process. So there was no extra pressure and extra financial stuff and all of these extra things. The other side that I got really lucky on is my daughter's mother is close with her dad. And so I never was limited access with my daughter. You know what I mean? It was always my daughter comes and goes as she, even still, comes and goes as she pleases. But we are adults and, it's same rules at both houses. She grounded there, she grounded here. She's not playing us off each other because we talk, discuss best for her. If she's in trouble, she's in trouble both places. But also, my daughter's in a blended family now. We sit by each other at the school functions, the dance recitals, the sports stuff, and then barbecue in the summertime, some holidays, depending on if everybody's in town and this and that. So, I mean, my situation has gotten to be really smooth and easy,
Okay.
but when when you break up, go through the divorce process, start in the divorce process and or any of those things, I had a really hard time getting out of my own way and sort of grieving the relationship and letting it die, which I think is the hardest part for most everybody because you want to really use all of these feelings and emotions as a crutch to either make your felt self feel better for the situation or to have somebody to blame. And I think
Okay.
it gets worsened a little bit when you get into the court process because then you have lawyers, mediators, and you're feeding into this money machine that's masked by the guise of best interest of the children, right?
Mm.
And but when you get into this process, a lot of the people I talk to and work with, more times than not, it was almost pretty civil until the lawyers got involved. And then it becomes finger pointing from both sides at the other side. And then you
Yeah.
start getting mad or, you can build or it doesn't help you get over or through any of the unresolved anger or resentment or hurt feelings or all of these different things. And then, from the dad's perspective, you basically lost everything. They tell you that it's either in the best interest of the kids or, there's a lot of guys that I talk to that have, quote unquote, week on, week off 50-50 custody of their kids, but they're still paying. I don't understand how they can say it's 50-50 and you do week on, week off and you have equal time, but somebody's still paying the other person to babysit your kids instead of just giving you more time with your children. And then that causes more resentment because you're paying money that you don't feel like you should be paying, or you lost in the court process, or your lawyer just straight up told you you're not going to win, so don't fight anyway. And it's just a lot of just gut punches and shots to the face over and over through the whole process that the average guy just wants to be with his children, and
Yeah.
then a lot of times, you get 6-8 days a month, every other weekend, and then maybe spring break and a month in the summer or something like that is pretty typical. And so it's easy to hold on to all these emotions. And then, in my case, I would instantly get defensive. Like the biggest thing that I had to get over was myself. And, we kind of got into this routine where I would get a message, it'd throw my nervous system off. I'd go into, anxious mode or, fight or flight, and I'd react by saying something back, and then she would react and it would go back and forth for, a few days or a week until one or that both of us had bottled up the back and forth enough to where one of us got, pushed over the edge and then turned into this big old fight over a screaming match on the phone or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
And then the more that I healed from the baggage and all of the hurt feelings and all of these different things from the relationship, the easier it was to stop reacting and start responding. And then it became easier to communicate because I wasn't poking back or I wasn't feeling like I was being poked. Because most of the time it was just me being instantly defensive and it had nothing to do with anything that, it was the way I took it, not what was being said. And so
Yeah.
for me, I had to actually get one of those little memo pad notebooks
Hmm.
and carry it around with me all the time. And then like
Okay.
I would get a text and you can feel yourself. your heart rate go up and you get,
Mm-hmm.
irritated or whatever. And so I had to start writing in that what I was going to say back, and then I would come back to it
Okay.
when my system calmed back down. And like 9 times out of 10, like that's not what I ended up sending back, because that I had to train myself to stop, snap responding, snap reacting, and start responding. Because I'd come back a couple hours later, next day or something like that, read it, be like, nah, I'm not sending that. And I'd send an actual response as opposed
Mm-hmm.
to a poke back, unless it needed my attention, quicker than that. But I
Yeah.
mean, I had to train myself to stop giving the reaction maybe she was looking for, or being instantly defensive, or letting my, emotions cloud my better judgment on what I wanted to reply with or what I wanted to say back or anything like that. And I mean, it was a process and it took a while, but training yourself to communicate differently and see them as a different person is usually the first kind of things you got to get through, because if you're holding on to all this baggage and all of this trauma and all of these emotions, then it's hard to move forward in the reality that you're in, because you're not with that person anymore, you know.
Yeah.
But if you keep communicating the same way you were at the end of your marriage, it's just going to keep revolving with the same sort of interactions.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense, right? The trying the same thing and expecting a different outcome kind
Right.
of thing.
Right.
Yeah. And so I'm curious for you, because I heard you mention in there that you found that many times kind of that reactivity was maybe rooted in that feeling of defensiveness.
Mhm.
And so and I heard you a couple times kind of mention some of your bags that
Mhm.
you were carrying around. And so I'm curious, like what what was maybe coming up? What was your brain trying to convince you of that maybe led to, like you said, that path of feeling defensive and feeling like I need to go to war? Can you say a little bit more about maybe what was the narrative that you were working with?
Ah, I mean, up until that point, from from childhood, I'd been telling myself and following this narrative that I was a victim, and it woe is me, shoe's always going to drop. Whether I was self-sabotaging myself or not, it was always something else, something external. It wasn't my fault, even knowing I made the decision to be in this place, do these things, and all these different things. And so I got into this habit or identity of being the victim, or always thinking I was the victim, or the blame game kind of deals and stuff like that. And so for me, I had to backtrack, once I started became aware and started doing different work on myself and baggage sorting and trauma and all these different things. I had to figure out why she triggered me, and then it jumped back to somebody else in, 10 years before her. And then it went into like when I was in high school. And then it, eventually I made my way all the way back to when I was a kid,
Yeah.
and then had to fix that, heal that, get over that, bullshit. And then jump up to where the next one where I felt like, it kept me in that state, or, this girlfriend in high school, da 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 da. So then I had to just let that go, because, I can't do anything about it now, forgive them, whatever I need to do to heal. And then it became, accepting a lot of the things that I was doing in my 20s and early 30s, that kind of stuff that I needed to either take accountability for, forgive people for, forgive myself for, look at objectively, and realize that some circumstances are just circumstances. Nobody's maliciously trying to do these things to you. And then as I got better at self-reflection, then I was able to start training myself how to be a better communicator and how to have difficult conversations without either feeling like I was attacked, or feeling like somebody was trying to screw me over or take advantage of me, or, because I mean that was most of it is I had a lot of low self-worth and a lot of self-worth issues growing up and through my teenage years. And so I always felt like I got people who were either abusive or takers or people that would, railroad you around me and in my life because they knew they could, because I allowed them to, because that's how I felt like I deserved to be treated. And then it propelled into, all these other things. And so I mean, it was a process. It took me a few years to get through a lot of it, but the bigger part of it was my childhood and trying to break generational curses and not be the same kind of parent to my daughter that my parents were, and sort of raise her in a loving household that wasn't emotionally disconnected and try to set her up the best I could for a successful future. And so if I wanted to change these things and her to be more equipped as a, young adult than I was, then I needed to add more tools to my toolbox. And so then it became working with people, getting outside opinions that had been through it. It's not like I could go and get my mom's advice when she'd never been divorced and it didn't co-parent at all. So I mean, being aware of who you're taking advice from and the information that you're bringing in was a big part of it. But that was part of the process of, you know, the more I could accept a lot of these things, the easier it was to let go of a lot of these hurt feelings and issues and stuff because nobody was picking on me. Her mother wasn't doing these things maliciously to hurt me. And even if she was looking for a certain reaction, I was probably giving it to her because she knew that's how I was going to react. And so I had to change my reactions so that she'd stop looking for those reactions. And then it became easier to communicate and easier to communicate and easier to communicate because I was stuck in this mindset, the same mental space and emotional state and mindset that I was at the end of the relationship, even knowing the relationship has been dead for a year and a half. And my new reality is she's the other parent, I'm a parent, and we're trying to raise a child, as opposed to you hurt me and all these other things that you can get wrapped up in and kind of dwell on for too long.
Yeah. And it sounds like, if I'm hearing you correctly, and let me know if I'm way off base here, is that for you, as you did some of your unpacking and your work on yourself and figuring out kind of maybe the origin of some of that defensiveness, that it sounds like it came from maybe your brain's way when you were a child. This is the way to cope because this is what helps keep us safe. Like if I go into
Right,
this space of it's happening to me, because likely as a child, we are helpless in those
right,
states, and we don't have a ton of resources, especially if it's coming from someone near and dear to us, that society is saying, hey, this is the person taking care of you. That I
right,
imagine your brain is going, well, I've got to figure out how to survive somehow. And so if I go into this headspace and this particular narrative, that's a little bit easier to swallow than to swallow an idea of I'm not worth this love or this care or this compassion.
right,
That's a really hard thing that to swallow. And so why on earth would our brain want to like lead
right,
us there? So instead, let's get this other narrative. This one's easier to swallow.
right,
And so it sounds like from that from that place of protection, it just kind of grew, and you became really good, it sounds like, at going to that narrative,
right,
because again, that's something that's known and that has served you and protected you
right.
in other circumstances. Am I hearing that correctly?
Yeah. Well, it did. And not that, it took me well into my 30s to accept the fact that my parents did the best they could with the tools that they had and that they were more emotionally available and open than their parents were and did a better job than their parents and you do the best you can with the knowledge and the way that you were raised unless you want to change it and be different. And
Mm-hmm.
it was just an emotionally disconnected household. And so
Yeah.
you really only got I was an easy kid. I have an older brother that's, 2 years older than me. He demanded a lot of attention. And so the only way that so I grew up with the forgotten child, middle child kind of syndrome as a kid.
Okay.
And so the only way you really got attention is if you were doing something wrong. And so
Mm,
then what does every kid say to their parents when you get caught doing something wrong? It wasn't me. It wasn't my fault. I didn't mean to, or, and then it becomes a habit. That's just your reaction to anything that happens.
yeah.
Because I've got 12 years of experience of every time, this is when somebody notices me. Well, I don't want to, get a spanking or be in trouble. So I didn't mean to. It wasn't my fault. This is, how it happened, and I was just happened to be there, whatever the case may be. And
Hmm.
then when I got about 15, then it became high school partying a little bit, and then alcohol became the biggest crutch I could use because I didn't have to be me, and I could be numb, and I didn't have to deal with the real world. But
Yeah.
every time trouble came around the corner, I could, oh, it wasn't my fault. I just, everybody's doing it. I'm just the one that gets
Hmm.
caught all the time, or I'm the one that gets picked up by the police and, knocks on your door to sign off a deal or I can be dropped off at home and all these different things. Well, it's not my fault. We live in a small town and there's nothing else to, you know what I mean? And then it just
Yeah.
became the excuse game for everything.
Yeah. And I really appreciate you kind of bringing that to light because I think on a couple fronts. First of all, that many times, like you said, that our parents and even us as parents aren't necessarily going into this journey going, how can I destroy my child's life?
Right.
Like I don't think I've ever met any parent who would say that that's the intent.
Right.
It doesn't mean, like you said, that it's not necessarily something that ends up occurring for one reason or another. And that also for you kind of mentioning just that piece of it, that for you it came from, like you said, that place of trying to figure out how do I get along in this world and how do I
Right.
fit, and and oftentimes I find that when we're talking about some of these maybe um un, not as healthy kind of coping skills, right, that
Right.
often they are coming from that place where our brain isn't going, how can I destroy myself or self-sabotage or hurt other people. Again, we're not, I don't think that most people are going into it with that
Right.
mentality, but rather, I'm feeling unsafe in this moment and this particular thing helps me feel safe. And so our brains naturally want to keep us safe. I mean, it's that instinct, that survival
Right.
instinct.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Well,
And
and then
so I think,
it does. And then it would, looking back, it makes sense to me. And I had a conversation with somebody earlier today about, you know, your comfort zone is your comfort zone, whether that's chaos or being in anxiety or being in an abusive relationship or being in toxic relationships or whatever the case may be, whatever your comfort zone is, until you do some sort of work or get through it. And, looking back now, throughout, my 20s, every time something, I felt the most uneasy and the most anxious when things in my life seemed to be going really well and I didn't have a big disruption. So then I became anxious and I was waiting for it around the corner. And then typically I would subconsciously do something to blow up whatever I had going
yeah.
because I needed that chaos to feel
Mm-hmm.
safe. I needed
Mm-hmm.
that tension, and I needed, and so when everything was chaotic around me is when my nervous system was calm and I felt safe, even
Yeah.
knowing the whole, my whole life is going to shit. And then it was on repeat, every, 3, 4, 5 years when I had was doing well at my job or starting a business or had a decent relationship with somebody or my friends, and we were all clicking and driving and everything was going good and no worries, no worries, no worries. And then it became like a deal where I'm sitting there waiting for the other shoe to drop or waiting for the, to step in that hole and something just to go wrong. And then most of the time I would kick a domino that would make it do that, but I
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't know that I wouldn't necessarily know that I was doing that. But I wasn't, able to get out of that state, but when you're doing it, you don't even realize that you're doing it,
Yeah.
you know.
Absolutely. And that makes a ton of sense. In fact, I've read even the studies, right, that when you're in that state of that higher level of cortisol for a long enough period of time, your body, like you said, kind of gets used to that. Okay, that's our baseline. So maybe
Right,
our baseline at birth was lower, but then, we're in a constant state of chaos. Now your body goes, okay, well, this is the new baseline we need to
right,
create in order to again help us survive. And so when we find, like you said, maybe an environment that isn't as chaotic, our body, tends to go, this doesn't feel great. I know this doesn't
right,
feel safe. And so I can absolutely appreciate then, like you said, where there's almost a comfort
right,
and in the chaos, because at least I know the chaos, I know how to operate in
right,
that, versus the calm where I haven't really been shown that calm is safe, and
right,
so now I'm on edge
right, right.
because
And you see it a lot with people who you see it a lot, with people who had that weren't nurtured or had, chaotic relationships with their parents or watched their parents have chaotic relationships or
mhm,
in my case, my parents were essentially roommates from the time I can remember till I was like 17 years old. I never saw them kiss. They never said I love you. But that was the norm,
yeah,
and we would all go, we didn't have a lot of money. Dad worked a lot, they worked a lot, all that stuff. But, we'd take like two camping trips a year and everybody would go, but my parents had never went on a date night, never went to on a vacation by themselves that my entire child. I mean, all of these things. So this was my
mhm,
norm, and it was a fairly chaotic place. Even knowing my dad had gotten sober when I was, 4 or 5 years old, his mentality and actions and everything else. I mean, it didn't, there was no alcohol around, but everything else was the same for the most part.
okay, yeah,
And so, then in my 20s, the chaotic, toxic relationships felt safe. But when somebody was normal or, emotionally intelligent or honest or able to express their wants, needs, boundaries, feelings and all these different things, that felt foreign to me. And so
yeah,
that would scare me and send me into like, I don't like this. And you see it a
mhm,
lot, and you see it a lot with, when you hear women talk about, I need the exciting guy, but I don't like the guy that's the boring guy, because it's, you know, not normal to them, and these things.
uh-huh,
And you see it in a lot of different situations, guys are the same way, you know, somebody who's grew up in a place where it's chaos and all these different things, and they meet somebody that, is from, I live in a rural area, like a farmer's daughter where they go to church as a family every Sunday and everybody, like, and it just feels foreign to me. Like when
yeah,
me and my daughter's mother were together, they have a close family, so they're all together on every holiday and they do like dinners and all these different things. And it was like I couldn't get used to it, but I hadn't done any sort of work or healing. But it was
mhm,
so, everybody being calm and just, getting along for the most part, as much as families do, but doing all
yeah,
these things together and, birthdays and all these things are a big family event. That was foreign to me.
mhm. Yeah. And so I'm curious, like you said, with all of that being foreign, and even it sounds like kind of that emotional vulnerability being just a big no-no at this point,
Right.
how how was that for you, especially at the beginning of your journey when you're trying to kind of maybe open these things, open wounds that maybe have been there for who knows how long, which require, I imagine, a degree of vulnerability and
Right.
maybe even honesty with yourself.
A
What was
lot
that
of
like to
honesty.
kind of yeah, go through that? And were there barriers that you found yourself kind of coming up against that you had to work through?
Yeah. I mean, the more I learned about, you know, trauma from different books, I got really into to paying attention and being aware. I started doing mindfulness training and being aware and practice, training your mind to not control your thoughts, but not get wrapped in your thoughts at the same time and all that stuff. And then I read books on, the importance of habits, the small wins, the mental shifts, the internal dialogues, the processing trauma and grief. And, you know, some of it was extremely uncomfortable. Parts of it was extremely lonely and
Mm,
isolating.
okay.
And it goes, if you don't like yourself, it's really hard to be alone. But it's really hard to be a good person or good for the people around you if you don't like yourself and you can't be alone. Like now I'm alone, but I'm not lonely. Before I was lonely, so I tried to fill this void, whether it be with, alcohol or people or fake friends or going to the bar would fill that hole for a certain amount of time because there was people around and you knew them because you were down there all the time just like them and all these different things. And so you were constantly doing all these things to try to not have to be yourself, not have to deal with yourself. But even so it takes it's really uncomfortable and it's a process and it's hard to take a look at yourself, and then you start identifying your triggers and then you start figuring out why they're triggers and why you react this way and you can map out how you're sabotaging yourself and doing these things and it's uncomfortable. And then as you grow, you sort of find yourself in this limbo for however long, depending on how hard the work is, how much you're actually doing and this and that, because you're not the person that you were, so you don't really have anything in common with the people that you used to interact with all the time. And when you become aware of everything. And so you notice
Yeah.
things that you didn't notice before. So maybe this childhood friend is a shitty parent and you don't necessarily want to be around that kind of person anymore. So now you got to distance yourself from the people who drink if you don't want to drink and the people that are toxic if you don't want toxic people in your life because you start to figure out who gives you energy and who drains you and all of these different things, but you're not quite healed enough to be on the level of all the people that you're gonna be surrounding yourself with and interacting with.
Yeah.
It'd be like somebody that's in midway of their fitness journey. You're not in the beginner class anymore, but you're not quite with the people that are working out 5 days a week or whatever. So you're kind of in the middle you know, but that's where the coaches and the therapists and the communities of people that are in the same kinds of situations are dealing with the same sorts of, you know, mindsets and external problems because just like your diet or just like fitness or just like business or just like anything else, you may go 3 or 4 steps forward and feel really great, but then you might take 6 steps backwards or, sideways and the plateaus and the ups and downs, it's isolating if you're trying to do it all by yourself and it's time consuming.
Yeah. And I imagine, like you said, if you're in that space where you're starting to become more aware of
Mhm.
maybe even other people's behaviors and going, if I want to make this change, it might also come with distancing myself from these people. And I
Right,
imagine that in itself could be a really scary barrier for people
right,
to want to do that change because again, now I'm letting go of these people and maybe it turns out to be most everyone that I'm currently surrounding myself with.
right,
And that's scary.
right. Because then, I mean, it is, but anytime that you're getting out of your comfort zone and making changes, it's always going to be scary. It's whether or not you can keep going and do the small things and keep changing your habits and keep doing these things because, you know, you're growing and you're outgrowing people and you're growing into somebody and all of these things. And then, especially with the people that I talk to and the guys and girls or ladies that I work with and that kind of stuff. And it's like, well, I can't outgrow the other parent. We're connected.
Mm,
We have to communicate, and it's
yeah.
like fair, you know. But do well, they're always calling me and, venting or talks, dumping on me with stuff that doesn't have to do with our kids or blah blah blah, whatever. It's like
Hmm.
then you need to start making boundaries and be like, this is not my business problem and something that I, you don't need to be telling me. we can be friendly, but I don't
Hmm.
need to know about your problems with your significant other. You know what I mean? Like this is not my
Yeah.
business, and I don't, if you need a therapist, then go fucking hire one. I'm not it.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? I know that we have history in this and that, but a lot of people, so it's understanding the people that are draining you compared to the people that, give you energy. And so even if it's
Yeah.
family, if say your mom is overbearing and every time you talk to her and she calls you every day and you talk to her every day and every time you get off the phone you're exhausted and you just like feel shitty about yourself because everything's a problem and you're getting picked apart. Every aspect of your life is getting picked apart, and it's like, yeah, I get it, it's your mom and you love your mom.
Hmm.
Everybody loves their mom, but maybe you don't need to talk to her every day.
Yeah.
Maybe talk to her on Sundays.
Mm.
Sunday, early on Sunday, so you can rest the rest of the day. And then you don't have to be drained all week. Instead of having 5 30-minute conversations a week, maybe just have 1 hour one on Sundays or an hour and a half one. And if it's really bad, every other week, once a
Yeah.
month. Nobody says that you have to be this worn out, burned out entity walking around because everybody's uses you as their emotional toxic waste dump or makes you feel bad about yourself or drains your energy. Because if you don't have no energy, then you're not good for anybody, especially your
Hmm.
kids.
Yeah. And I love that you pointed that out because I hear that commonly as kind of a retort when we talk about, like you said, kind of setting some of those boundaries. It's, oh, well, does that make me a bad person? Or, am I selfish? Or all these kind of, the propensity, right, to go inner
Right.
critic on ourselves,
Right. Right.
versus being able to maybe zoom out and say, gosh, if I can draw this boundary, and maybe set some limits with that, I can still love them, but not
Right.
necessarily have to take on some of those behaviors or take on their bad day.
Right. Right.
What does that free me up to do in as far as being the parent and showing up and being maybe the partner that I want to be, the parent that I want to be,
Right.
or just show up for me?
Right. Right. I mean, there's a reason that when you get on an airplane, they tell you to put your mask on first.
Yeah.
And your energy, your life, and everything around you is the exact same way. Like
Hmm.
if you talk to somebody at 2 o'clock every afternoon and they drain you and they make you feel shitty about yourself, whether it's a friend or family or whatever, your other parent, it doesn't matter. And it exhausts you or puts you in a bad mood every time or makes you feel shitty about yourself. And then you go pick your kids up at 3 p.m. How good are you to your kids when you're picking them up from school? You're probably
Yeah.
sitting there you're probably sitting there pissed off or, half in tears or depressed or wore out or ready for a nap or whatever the case may be, instead of being like, I doubt you're even asking them how their day was, what they learned in
Hmm.
school. You know what I mean? And then it's just come home, you're tired, so then you're going to order fast food or pizza or pick something up on the way home because you don't have the energy to cook. So then your kids aren't getting the nutrition or food or, dinner that they probably deserve or that you would have been able to cook, or you're short with them. They're not in there helping you because you don't have any more energy and this and that. So then you just hand them a tablet and tell them to go to town because you don't have the energy to interact or help or do any of these things that if you cut that person out of the weekday life, I mean, you get to have all these wonderful things with your children or your spouse or your significant other or, whatever,
Yeah.
as opposed to doom scrolling on Facebook with your phone because you're wore out because your mom took all your energy, you know,
Hmm.
or your brother took all your energy or your sister or cousin or a friend who, calls you just specifically because they don't have a therapist and they want to dump all their problems on you. You know what I mean? Like, but you're
Yeah.
not, there's nothing in your life that tells you you have to be everybody around you's therapist or
Mm.
venting ear or, problem solver or, you get to pick and choose who you have in your life.
Yeah. I know you mentioned at the beginning that um, kind of early on in your journey, you had lost your father as well. And so I'm
Mhm.
curious, like for you and some of this work that you were doing, in trying to kind of, like you said, learn some of these boundaries, these limits, figure out and sort through some of your bags, and heal. Where in your journey did that happen, and did that kind of shake things up, or rock your world as far as in terms of healing, even?
Uh, well, so my situation was a bit, everything comes in threes, as they say, in a lot of different cultures and different things, and so I work in construction, do carpentry and remodel houses and this and that, live in a rural area. Your pickup is your most important tool to do your job because that gets you back and forth. You could be anywhere within 100 miles. So I blew the transmission in my pickup. Well, it went out. So then I had no pickup. And like a week or two later, threw in the towel, no more relationships. So then I did what everybody does when you split up and you have to start completely over at life and do all these things from scratch. You move in with your parents to get on your feet to figure out, it's not like you're looking for a new place while you're breaking up and moving out of your house. You know what I mean? Most people have to go either family or friends or, something to
Mm-hmm.
to start sorting it out. So then get to my parents' house, which is in the same town, 6, 8 blocks away. I think I was there for like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, maybe. And my dad died unexpectedly. Now, when I say unexpectedly, he was training for the qualifier for the Boston Marathon. He was on his Sunday morning run on mile 8 and he died.
Wow.
And so I got grief, grief, huge pain in the ass not having my pickup or a
Yeah.
pickup, like not having any way to get back and forth, not having any way to get around. Got thrown into single fatherhood. Still have no way to go pick her up, get around, do any of these things that I need to be able to do as a father, especially a father that doesn't have the mom, in the same house and doing all these things. Then my dad dies. So then it spins me into this. And I mean, like I went into a depression, but I was, then it sent me into this depression, but it also was a lot of it sort of self put I put it on myself. Nobody really asked me to, but then that was part of the victim, sort of
Mm-hmm.
habits that I had gotten into. But I felt stuck at my mom's house, not only in my grief, but not able to escape her grief like my brother could. My brother could go home and get away from, my mom that just lost her husband of 35 years, whatever. So then I got started putting this extra guilt on myself that like, fuck, I can't move out because then my mom's going to be alone. And she hasn't been alone in
Yeah.
her entire adult life and all these different things. But I was not processing any kind of grief or any of my situation in this. And so, instead of hiding in alcohol, I hid in, for like a year and a half, a couple of years. All I did was go to work, come home, hang out with my daughter. If I wasn't at work, I was hanging out with my daughter. If I didn't have my daughter, then I was just at my parents' house.
Mm.
Didn't go socialize, lost all my friends, stopped communicating with anybody and everybody that didn't either directly relate to work or parent.
Yeah.
And then it was a deal where my mom was, at one point, my mom just finally was like, "Hey, you need to go," you know. But I had done a bunch of the work and was in a
Yeah.
place where I was not, you know, feeling trapped necessarily, but I was kind of not really sure when the right time to just, here, you could live in this half acre with 4 bedroom house that you can't really keep track,
Yeah.
that's going to be a lot of house and a lot of work and all these different things for you. Because when dad died, not only did my mom lose her husband, but she also lost essentially her job because he was the cook, she was the waitress at the restaurant that they owned. So then the restaurant
Oh.
shut down. So then COVID hits and there's all these different things that kind of came later, but it forced me to process a lot of things, but also my dad was the object of a lot of my childhood baggage and trauma.
Mm.
And it was whether it was easier or not, when he died, I could finally sort of deal with it because there was nothing I could do about it. It's not like I could sit there and have the conversations with him. I had to just let it go. And that made it
Yeah.
easier to just let go of all the same sort of hurt feelings or animosity or pent up whatever emotional stuff with my daughter's mother. It was easier to just it made it, once I processed that grief and let go of a lot of the baggage and trauma from my life with him, it became easier to sort of go through and do that with everybody else that was in and around my life on a smaller scale compared to him or compared
Hmm.
to my childhood. And so then it became easier to forgive others and it became easier to forgive myself and it became easier to take a long look in the mirror or look inside and figure out that, like, 90% of the time I was the fucking problem. In
Yeah.
this instance, it was me that was doing this. And in this instance, it was me that was reacting this way or doing this and because of this. And, but that helped with the triggers and the identifying a lot of those things. But it was a deal where I was sitting there and I was acting like my dad. My daughter was like 2.5, 3.5, 4 years old, something like that. I'm fighting with her mom on the phone. She's crying. I thought she was inside, but I'm screaming out on the phone, getting screamed at on the phone. Look over, she's crying. My mom's looking at me like I'm a piece of shit. And I was like, fuck, this is not the life I want. And this sure isn't the life I want her to have. And so then it just
Yeah.
became, how do I make changes? How do I change the reality that I'm in? And how do I change the way that I act? And how do I change the way that I think? And then it became a snowball rolling down a hill because you keep getting momentum the more that you can be uncomfortable, look actually look at yourself and your actions and take accountability and do these things. The first few of them is hard because you don't
Mm.
want to believe that you're the problem or that you're maybe not the best or you're not the good communicator. It's everybody, all these different things.
Yeah.
But the more that I could kind of flip through a few of them and the more that I got through a few of them, then it became easier to get through others because I already knew, like, this is my habit.
Hmm.
This is the same as that one. I did the same
Yeah.
thing. I had the same react, you know what I mean? And then as you get momentum, it becomes easier and easier to keep, being aware and taking hard looks at yourself and being accountable to yourself about, you know, did I did I handle this situation the way that I think I did, or am I just trying to blame everybody else, or am I just not acknowledging my part that I played? You know what I mean? And even if it wasn't necessarily me, forgiveness is a powerful thing because you're not forgiving people for them. It's so that you can just let go of all the whatever you're holding on to most of the time.
Yeah. And what I really appreciate you mentioning there is, like you said, that momentum. I definitely find that in folks of it's that retraining of the brain, right? We're now giving our brain some new facts to latch onto of that, like, hey, I can go into this and I
Mhm.
can create a different way to find safety, versus purely relying on maybe this other
Right.
pattern and behavior that I've been doing. And I think you're so spot on that the more that we do that, the more facts that we give to our brain, it is that retraining of,
Hmm.
hey, I can do this and this is possible for me to do. And so I love that. And so my last question that I like to ask folks is that if you had access to a DeLorean,
Hmm.
I'm a huge Back to the Future fan, so that's why we're going there. Um, is there any point in time that you would go back and not necessarily to change something, but to offer you at whatever age that's maybe appropriate, offer yourself some words or a different thought, or even maybe it's just a hug, that you would offer? What would you say?
I would I would probably go back to when I was mm, I don't know, 8, 10 years old maybe, and tell myself, and I think this was one of the biggest uh I keep wanting to say catapults, but one of the biggest, like, So we got attention when we did something wrong or something didn't work out or whatever the case was. And
Hmm.
so, you know, before that started becoming my habits, I was, pretty athletic, didn't need attention in sports, but my brother wasn't so athletic, so he needed a lot of attention. And so to get attention, you either had to be doing something wrong or need help. But you couldn't ask for help. It was more had to watch, get fairly good at it, and then somebody would either, you just basically had to watch and learn. And I would go back and tell myself that like even knowing nobody's going to notice and you're not going to get any acknowledgement or praise, it doesn't mean that you should stop trying because that was one of the biggest catalysts for me to just give up on everything and just throw my hands
Wow.
up and say fuck it. And so like and I don't remember exactly when that sort of sunk in. Maybe it was learned over different sports and doing different teams, different baseball seasons and different wrestling seasons and stuff like that. But it was,
Yeah.
being good or possibly, maybe a little above average athletically. I didn't need help to get better, and I wasn't really running into adversity. And so then
Hmm.
everything I was doing was unnoticed. And so then it became a habit of why try if nobody even gives a shit. And so then that
Yeah.
sprawled into all aspects of my life. Like if you don't try, you can't fail. And if you don't fail,
Mm.
you're not in trouble. And if
Yeah.
you don't get in trouble, then you know what I mean? And it just kind of spider webbed out. But I think that's probably the biggest thing I would go back and, I don't necessarily think I would want to change anything, but
Yeah.
I'd probably give myself a hug and be like, you can still try.
Hmm.
Somebody, later down the road, people will notice and you will get the acknowledgement or not that praise is a bad word or praise isn't good, but the more effort you put in, the better you get, the more you try, the more rewards you'll get later in life and
Yeah.
in different situations because it's all depends on how much you want to, do it for yourself more than other people, I guess.
Hmm. And I love that message, that idea of you as yourself, as your own person, that you deserve to try.
Right.
And and being able to kind of even extend that to yourself, I think is just such a wonderful message that hopefully our listeners, we're hearing that, and you yourself, whoever's listening, also deserve to try. If you know, not for anybody else, but just for yourself. So that's awesome. All right, JP. So for anybody who uh, is wanting to connect with you or any services, this is our shameless plug section. So tell us all, what is it that you're offering? How can they find you?
On Instagram is the best place, and then it's just at JPMRSH. And then that's where, people can send me messages or ask me questions or connect or anything like that. I don't love social media, so I don't really do a lot. I don't it's not it's not something that I it's just it drains me and it's
Yeah.
it's just too much a lot of times and I have other things to do. But I did start a podcast, so then once I start publishing those soon, I hope. But I'm working on
Okay.
it.
Yeah. Do you have a name where you're planning on releasing your podcast so we can be on the lookout?
Marsh Talks,
Okay.
and I have it set up to go to do Spotify, but I haven't created any of the other ones yet.
Okay. Well, make sure to check that out, everyone. And as always, we'll make sure any of the links to socials get popped down to our show notes so you can check them out there. So I'm excited. I've got my guy all ready to go and pop them in the fridge to set. And so
Perfect.
thank you so much for sharing this recipe with us. Also for just being willing to share your story, help normalize, especially for our dads out there that are listening, that parenting is hard.
It
Going on
is.
some of this healing journey is really hard. But that you are not alone and that it is possible. So I really appreciate you being willing to share that with us and join us today. So thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and thank you everyone for listening. We'll talk to you next time. If you or anyone that you know is struggling with any of the topics that we discussed in today's episode, make sure to check out our show notes for support and resources. You can get help. Thanks again for joining us on today's episode of The Real Family Eats. If you're a parent ready to share your real life parenting story, make sure to reach out to us in our website found in the show notes. And that goes for today's recipe, social medias, support, and resources. All of that can be found in our show notes. So make sure to check them out. And make sure to follow, like, share, subscribe, and stay up to date on all things The Real Family Eats. I hope you'll join us next time for more food for thought and thoughtful food. Enjoy your eats.